I call to order the regular meeting of the Mount Pleasant City Commission. We're having feedback. Monday, September 11th, 2023 at 7 p.m. Please stand for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Mount Pleasant City Commission recognizes the Anishinaabe, whose ancestral lands the city stands upon today. We acknowledge the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe and recognize that the three bands of Ojibwe, Saginaw, Black River, and Swan Creek, have resided in this land for over 200 years. Our acknowledgement of the full history of the tribe and our commitment to be good stewards of these ancestral lands are an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those ancestors who came before us. We give thanks to the generous care with which Anishinaabe and those members of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan have given and continue to give to this land and our community. Clerk, please take the roll.
Commissioner Asman?
Here.
Commissioner Bush? Here. Commissioner Chapman?
Here.
Commissioner Ake?
Here.
Commissioner Wingard?
Here.
Vice Mayor Alsager?
Here.
Mayor Perschbacher?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, since we have a quorum, we will continue with the meeting. At this time, we have the introduction of the Utility Billing Officer, Office Professional Susan Tham.
Good evening, Commission. It is my pleasure to introduce Susan Tam. She comes to us. She also works at ICTC. She graduated from the University of California, Irvine with bachelor's in informatics, information, computer science. And beyond that, she's also done a 10-month stint at AmeriCorps, and we're very happy to have her on board. And anything you want to say?
Nice to meet you all, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Welcome,
You're
Susan.
Welcome.
Now we have the introduction of the Parks and Public Spaces 1, Joe Bryant.
Good evening. I'm happy to announce that Joe Bryant has joined the Parks Department as a Parks and Public Spaces 1. He's been working as a seasonal employee of the Parks Department for the past 5 years, and we were lucky enough to get him full-time this year. So we're welcoming Joe.
Okay.
It's nice to meet all of you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Welcome.
All right, at this time, I'm going to read a proclamation recognizing the International Day of Peace, and I'm going to ask that Commissioner Eke come up with me. Commissioner Eke is the chair of the Isabella County Human Rights Committee. Whereas the United Nations General Assembly established the International Day of Peace in 1981, and whereas 2 decades later, in 2001, the General Assembly unanimously voted to designate September 21st as a day for global nonviolence and ceasefire. And whereas the International Day of Peace is the day dedicated to strengthening the ideals of peace, where all nations and people honor the cessation of hostilities and for the duration of the day, and whereas supporting the United Nations with this initiative will bring us all closer to having a more peaceful, just, and inclusive society that is free from fear and violence. Now, therefore, I, Amy Perschbacher, Mayor of the City of Mount Pleasant, on behalf of the City Commission, do hereby officially proclaim and observe September 21st as International Day of Peace in Mount Pleasant, and encourages our residents to recognize our individual and collective responsibilities to foster peace both within our community and among all nations and peoples. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and the Great Seal of the City of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, this 11th day of September, 2023. You're welcome. Yes. You want to talk about that?
Good evening, everyone. This is wonderful. I am so proud of my city and, of this proclamation that we undertook to do this and to recognize this day of peace, September the 21st. Peace is important. The Isabella County Human Rights Committee has had a peace event for the past few years. And on September the 23rd, Saturday, September the 23rd, we will hold our annual peace event titled Let Peace Reign. We will begin with a peace walk starting here at the Mount Pleasant City Hall parking lot and go to Island Park. And that begins at 3 p.m. here. And events will begin then at Island Park Art Pavilion at 4 p.m., continuing till 6 p.m. on September the 23rd, Saturday. So it is open to the public, and it is non-denominational and apolitical. Everybody is welcome. This year's theme is recognizing peace and also showing how, as individuals and as members of the community, we have contributed or what we have done to sustain peace. So I welcome all of you. Thank you. And thank you again for this proclamation.
At this time, we have a presentation on PACE by Mary Freeman of Lean and Green, Michigan. And I think I may have like bumped something. Did you fix it? Okay. All right.
Good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me here this evening. My name is Mary Freeman, and I'm with Lean and Green, Michigan, which we operate a PACE district in Michigan, a number of PACE districts, actually all together, they get into all one district. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of information about it and then leave some time to take any questions you might have about how PACE works. Go ahead. This is our team. You can see there's only 4 of us, but we do have PACE jurisdictions around the state. We have 55 as of last week. Go ahead. Oh, spacebar. Okay. Thanks. So PACE was established by the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act in 2010. And we are a public-private partnership. We started in 2012. The city of Howell joined last week, so we are now 55 counties, cities, and townships in Michigan, has about 74% of Michigan's population. The green areas are counties, and the dots are cities and townships, where the county hasn't joined, but the city or township. There's also counties that have cities in them, but you can't see the dots. Why did PACE get started? The problem was that energy efficiency, water efficiency, and renewable energy projects can be expensive. Traditional financing tools require large upfront capital investments for a slow long-term payback. And the purpose of PACE was to incentivize businesses and property owners to purchase higher level technologies to address these issues, but make the money go over a long period of time to make it possible for them to make the payments. The property owner voluntarily enters into a special assessment agreement, which can be repaid over a period of up to 25 years. That's actually 25 years is actually the most common in Michigan and around the country. We are one of 29 active PACE programs in the country. There's 29 there's 30 states that have active PACE programs, and another 8 that are trying to get up and running. So the local government gets a free economic development tool. The reason Lean and Green Michigan established itself was to provide the administration support on behalf of the local governments. And the property owners get 100% upfront financing and a fixed interest rate over the full term of the loan. And the PACE lenders get the security of a property lien that is created by the special assessment. So there are 5 partners in a PACE program, and that's the administrator, the property owner, the local government, the lender, and the contractor who performs the work. So in Michigan, PACE loans are required to be cash positive, so that in any given year, your loan payments must be less than what you are saving by buying the technologies that you purchased with the PACE loan. Many different types of different types of properties qualify for PACE. You can see the list up there: commercial, industrial, multifamily, agricultural, nonprofits. There are a few. The government buildings cannot apply for PACE in Michigan. There are some states like Ohio. There's a bunch of states that that's not the case, but in Michigan, it's only private property owners. These are some of the upgrades you can use PACE financing for. The most popular are the things that you need in every building: HVAC system, high quality windows, insulation, roofing, and caulking. But you can also add in all kinds of different renewable energy systems. We've had people put in anaerobic digesters, green roofs, geothermal wells, quite a few, some solar panels, and I think one permeable pavement that is up there, but that's usually only eligible in places that charge people for runoff, for the water runoff. Just making the point that EV charging stations are eligible for PACE financing, and a number of multifamily housings and hotels have put in, between 2 and 44 charging stations using PACE financing. We also have a PACE Express program because the statute says that you have to have that savings to investment ratio on loans over $250,000. So for those under that don't require that, we put together a faster paced kind of cookie cutter package, and it's got cheaper rates, and so that's what the PACE Express is. This is all changed a little bit actually based on legislation that passed in July, but it does not take effect until February or March, but I'll explain that a little bit later. These are the 5 parties that I mentioned earlier and some of their responsibilities and activities. This is what I just mentioned. The savings to investment ratio is no longer required for new construction beginning early next year. And that just is a kind of a common sense thing, because people were doing models like, what do you compare? How do you know you're saving something when there wasn't anything there before? So it's kind of a correction to the statute. But they've also added a whole new category of improvements that are PACE eligible. And it's called environmental hazard projects, and there are 4 categories: mitigating harmful substances like PFAS and lead from drinking water, mitigating the effects of flood or drought, increasing the resiliency of the property against severe weather, and mitigating lead paint contamination. There are 8 states that already have these kind of resiliency measures, and so we're working with them very closely to figure out how they are what their process is for these kinds of projects, because it's a whole different set of contractors. We don't know what the PACE lenders are going to have an appetite for. There's a lot that's unknown, but we've been working on it for a year and a half, and we still have 9 months, so we'll have it together by February or March when this goes into effect. One of the great things about PACE is that there are no government dollars involved. Maybe a little time, and I guess time is money, time to talk with me, time to listen to my presentation, and time to become a PACE district. And then after that, it's really time to approve a project if you think it should go forward. And you can task that to your authorized official to minimize the time and effort. But we do bring private investment into the state. Now we're up to $254 million out of the 30 states. We're very proud to be 7th. So that's exciting. And we have financed 72 projects across almost all the asset, I think all the asset classes at this point, since 2015. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I'm very happy to answer any questions about how PACE works, about how you become a PACE district, and anything else you want to ask.
Commissioner Bush.
Correct me if I misunderstood, but was there a maximum loan opportunity of $250,000? Did I?
Oh, that's just for the PACE Express program.
sorry, that's
Yeah,
right.
so the
Okay.
PACE Express is like anything $250,000 and less. And then the regular PACE program is for like $251,000. And so far, our largest project is $25 million. The largest project nationally is, I think, $120 million. Yeah.
What about smallest? Is this designed for, I mean, is there a minimum or is that up to the loan, the lender?
Well, currently, the sort of facts on the ground are that the only people lending in Michigan are national PACE lenders, and they've been very successful, and they spend the same amount of time on a $100,000 loan as they do on a $25 million loan. So they've made a kind of a lower threshold. And it's gone up in the last year and a half. It started out at around 500,000, then it went to 750. Now it's at $1 million.
Wow.
Some of the PACE lenders have gone up to 2 million. So the antidote to that is to connect with local banks and credit unions, because they can also become PACE lenders. And we've done webinars. We've met with bankers and executives of credit unions, and we're doing a lot of education around what they would need, what it would be for them to open PACE lending as a line of business, because basically we're seeing that that's going to be absolutely essential for PACE to serve the businesses that we originally had, we intended to serve smaller businesses as well as large businesses. And so we're working very hard. So whenever we talk to somebody about a project, we ask them about their local banker, and we try to meet with that banker, explain about PACE, and see if they're interested in becoming a PACE lender.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of initiated based on the need as opposed to just a general outreach to banks, like local banks.
Right. So we started by going to, one of the things that banks have to do is if they have a mortgage on a property that's taking out a PACE loan, they have to formally consent to the PACE loan on top of that mortgage. So the first thing we did was went to the consenting senior lenders, because they're already familiar with PACE. I think in Michigan, there's like, I don't know, 50. And so we went to them, and we've got a kind of a cohort of 6 that have said they really want to try to do it, and they're working on some projects right now.
Okay.
Commissioner Wingard.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you said, I think I'm conflating two things here. It was 25% was the maximum savings to investment ratio, or you were talking about loan to value or savings investment?
Oh, yeah. Did I say 25%? Or maybe it was on the slide.
It was on the slide.
But yeah, so the PACE loan can't exceed 25% of the finished value of the property. So if you have a let's just say $1 million property, and you're going to make it into a 3 million, well, let me make my math easier. If you have $1 million property and you're going to make it into a $4 million property, the maximum of your PACE loan is going to be $1 million.
Gotcha.
So typically speaking, people put together different sources of funding. Almost every PACE loan we've done in Michigan already has a mortgage. Maybe not a big one, but they have some kind of a mortgage. And the other key number is that we don't go over 90% of total indebtedness. So we take the mortgage, let's say that's 75%, and then the PACE, let's say the mortgage is 60%, and then the PACE loan is another 25%, that's 85%. Maybe they're going to get 5% from, like a rebate or a historical tax credit or something like that, but they can't go beyond 90%. If they start out with 100% of a mortgage property, we can't even work with them until they pay some of that off.
Gotcha. Can you have multiple PACE loans on a single property, or is?
Yeah, in fact, most, I would say half, well, it can't be half. We were trying to figure this out yesterday. There's quite a number. I would say at least 30 or maybe even 40% of people who've come back for a second project.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then I'm blanking on that question that I just had. I'm sorry. Is this formed through the state act or a federal act?
It's a state act, but there are 30 states that have their own act. They share this idea of a special assessment agreement and the involvement of the local government, because the special assessment agreement creates a lien against the property which goes on the tax roll. So you can't do that without the permission and engagement of the local government. So that's true with all the PACE programs, but then they have some different, some of them are 30% of that, and some are 95%, and some do government properties. There's different things like that are different. So like in California, they have PACE for seismic, for bolstering buildings against seismic activity. And in Florida, they have about flooding.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I just have one question. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of say if we would do a PACE district for the whole city of Mount Pleasant, and there's some various homeowners that want to do solar panels, is that too small of a project if it's maybe a $16,000 putting solar panels on your roof?
So the key thing about PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, is that the PACE that we have in Michigan is only commercial. It's 100% commercial. There are programs like Michigan Saves that do residential. It's not PACE though, it's just residential low interest loans for clean energy. But the Michigan, and nationally they call it C-PACE, commercial PACE. There are some states that have residential PACE, but very, very few, and of those, very few are operating. So commercial PACE is the most common. But that's a great question. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. I should make that super loud and clear at the beginning of the presentation. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Freeman.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I'm available for any questions from others if you want to contact me, if there's anything follow up, or if people think of things that I didn't think of tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we have a presentation of the Municipal Employees Retirement System of Michigan pension.
All right, and the representative from MERS is going to be joining us via Zoom. Tony, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you guys all hear me?
Yep, good to go.
Good. And once I see the presentation, are you controlling the presentation?
Yep.
All right, very good. So welcome everyone. My name's Tony Rujanovich. I'm the regional manager for MERS. We'll go through our team here in a little bit. I've been asked to come in here and give you a little bit about what MERS is and what we do in your pension plan. And so the next slide, please, talks about our agenda. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about MERS, because it's very important to understand who MERS is, what we do, how we're governed, understand public sector plans a little bit and how they work. And then we'll add in there some of the other plans that you have with us. We're going to mostly focus on the defined benefit plan, but you also have a defined contribution plan through MERS. You have a 457 plan through MERS. You also have what's called healthcare savings programs. We're going to just mention those, but we'll leave those for another time. Next slide, please. So the first thing is about MERS. MERS is an independent retirement services company that was created to administer the retirement plans for Michigan local units of government on a nonprofit basis back in 1947. And the city of Mount Pleasant was one of our first municipalities to join. You've been with us since 1947. MERS pools over $14 billion in assets from all of our local units of government. We provide reliable retirement benefits to over 140,000 participants across the many different types of plans that we have. And we're trusted with the majority of municipal pension plans in the state, right around 84%. Next slide, please. At MERS, our mission guides us. Simply put, our mission is to partner with those who serve Michigan communities, provide retirement benefits and related services to support a secure retirement. You, our partners, are at the very heart of every chosen word in this statement. Through surveys and focus groups, phone calls and conversations, event feedback and meetings just like this, your input is the driving force behind what MERS is focusing on as we move forward. So our mission, we partner with those who serve Michigan communities to provide retirement benefits and related services to support a secured retirement. And then our vision, we hope this is what we do. This is how we want to be seen. Through exceptional service and comprehensive solutions, MERS will deliver a seamless experience that engages, enable customers to achieve their financial goals. Next slide. The governance of MERS is always something that is asked to be understood by our councils and boards across our municipalities. It is an independent elected board that serves without compensation. And in the right-hand corner, we use these colored little figurine people. But the point of that is to show that it's a mix of different talents that come together on our board, and what their goals are: accountability, transparency, and holding the line on costs and watching out for the best interest of our members. And we have to do that because the MERS board is the sole fiduciary of the MERS plans. And those figurines are, you'll have 3 officer members. Those are people from our municipalities that have oversight or management responsibilities over other employees. We have 3 employees who have non-management jobs. They're not responsible for other employees. We have 2 appointed experts who have experience in retirement systems, administration of retirement systems, or investment management and advisory services. And there is 1 retiree member of the system. Next slide, please. So the fiduciary responsibility is more complex than just that statement that we're looking out for the benefit of the retirees. One of the primary reasons local units of government choose MERS is because we take on sole fiduciary responsibility for the plans. In a nutshell, this means that your council is you're not on your own. The MERS team spends time and energy wrestling with the complex matters that impact the administration of plans. We're grateful for all the work that this board does, and then also our other departments. As fiduciaries, we are required by law to take actions that are in the best interest of the plan participants. And when I say that, it simply means, when I say it that way, it seems simple, but there's a lot that goes into it. There are 3 primary areas of the fiduciary responsibility as listed there. We have to have legal compliance. We have to have investment oversight and reasonable expenses. If any one of those gets out of line, we are, even though we're looking out for the plan participant, we may not be adhering to our fiduciary responsibilities, so we do. Next slide, please. Today it's popular to talk about the need to increase shared services among government agencies, where one centralized organization provides the same service to many governments. MERS is one of the largest, oldest, and most successful shared services stories in Michigan's history. Since 1947, MERS has administered retirement benefits for the defined benefit plan and is an expert in the retirement industry. With MERS, employers benefit from our expertise in administration and investments, as well as fiduciary responsibility and oversight. This allows the governments to focus on your core services, leaving the day-to-day administration of your retirement plan to us. Next slide. The pooling powers financial security. MERS administers more than 3,000 different types of plans. Each municipality's retirement plan is maintained in a separate account. But MERS will pool assets for investment purposes, which provides huge benefits to our members by lowering the administrative costs and also lowering the cost for investments. Next slide, please. We have a regional team, and as I said, I'm the regional manager for the city of Mount Pleasant. You can see I'm a part of Region 3. Region 3, I believe, is the largest geographical region, depending how you stretch out the UP. Maybe we're 1 and 1A. But you have this regional team, me as a regional manager. You have Sonia Elahi as our benefit plan coordinator. And we have a dual role with Leah Banky. She is our benefit plan advisor and benefit education specialist, replacing the recently retired Debbie Rochester earlier this summer. And so Leah's been with us for quite some time. It's not a new position for her. It's just that she's moved from Region 6, previous in Region 2, and now she's in Region 3. Moving on to the public sector plans. And we can go right on into the next slide, which really talks about what MERS has to offer our municipalities. And because not one solution is for every municipality, you can see there's many different programs that are there. The ones that you may be mostly aware of are the defined benefit, defined contribution, the 457, healthcare savings program. Those are the plans that the city has adopted for MERS to administer for your employees. We also have other plans like the hybrid, the IRA and retiree health funding vehicle, and a couple other programs that may help provide, as we said earlier, towards retirement security for your employees. Next slide, please. Here we're going to talk a little bit about defined benefits and break them down and so what are some of the key aspects of them. So on the slide above, I'm going to start on the left-hand side, defined benefit. It's a lifetime benefit that does not fluctuate with investment gains or losses. Does not fluctuate with investment gains or losses. Let's go over to the right side. Defined contribution. It is a benefit based on the account balance, but it will fluctuate with gains or losses. The defined benefit, the contributions can fluctuate, whereas on the defined contribution side, back the contributions are fixed. They don't fluctuate. They are as they are adopted. All of these plans are funded by the employer, the employee, and retirement earnings. It's only employee if that's how it was originally set up. And then the hybrid plan, it is the combination of both of the plans. Part of the benefit is a guaranteed plan that won't gain or lose investment markets. And another part of it is defined contribution portion that will gain or lose with market performance. And the contributions will vary depending on how the fund performs. And now more popular in the most recent couple of years are 457 programs, not just as an addition to any of the retirement plans listed above, but some are electing them as their only plan. Now, there's advantages that I'm not going to get to on this slide of why a retirement plan may be more beneficial than just the 457, but you can use these industry plans in coordination with 457 plan like you do at the city, or you can, it could be standalone if you wanted to. Next slide. So what's the most popular retirement plan? Well, the defined benefit plan, mostly because when we started in 47, that was the only plan we offered. And so there are a lot of legacy plans that are still operating under the defined benefit, albeit closed. There are some of those that then opened up the defined benefit or the defined contribution or the hybrid plan. Some of our groups have come in directly as hybrids, some have come in directly as defined contribution. And we still have a fair amount of defined benefit plans that are opened. But with this slide, it shows you that we have over 1,000 municipalities in which we partner with MERS for benefit plan administration. Next slide, please. So our defined benefit and defined contribution plans, they're qualified retirement plans, and we're going to compare them a little bit, more than what we did in 2 slides ago. The advantages of a defined benefit plan is it provides a lifetime benefit that does not fluctuate with those investment gains. So your employees have an understanding of where their return may end up based on how long they work. It's funded by the employer, and the employer can ask or mandate through negotiations or through mandating employees to contribute, and then the investment earnings. And the thing about basically all of these plans, they reward long-term employees. The longer you work, in almost all cases, the larger your retirement benefit is going to be. In defined benefit, which is not available in defined contribution, there are provisions for death and disability if that happens while working. The defined contribution, the advantages there are that, let's go back to the considerations of defined benefit. What you have to consider about in a defined benefit is contributions can fluctuate because investments do go up and down. So therefore, if there's a loss, that has to be made up. But if there's a big gain, that big gain then will sit there and compensate for any loss that needs to be made up. It's limited on its ability to be portable. You can't really take it to many other places unless you're going to another MERS municipality, or you really can't take it with you. You can just coordinate your service credit. So it's not really taking it with you, but you still may be able to use it. Or if you're utilizing the Reciprocal Retirement Act of 1961, Act 88. But there's some limitations to it. The benefits do not increase if the investments go up. So it won't go down if the investments go down, but it won't go up if investments go up. And there could be a potential for unfunded accrued liability. This is a concern of the employer. This would add to your annual determined contributions if there is significant unfunded accrued liability due to assumptions not being met, or markets not being met is another form of assumption not being met. The defined contribution, the benefit is based on that account balance, which is held by the employee and managed by the employee. There's fixed contributions, meaning that once they onboard, there's that fixed contribution. There is no ability to make a change. They're easy to budget for because you know what that contribution is going to be. It's easy for the employees to budget for because they know what it's going to be. It's funded both by employer and employees and investment earnings. This is highly portable. Much like you'd find in the private sector, they can take it with them by rolling it over into other qualified accounts. With this account, this type of plan, there is no unfunded accrued liability associated with it. Some things you might want to consider: to work to its full potential, the employees must understand and be educated about its investments. If you're always too risky of a portfolio, that may not be the best. If you're not in a if you're so risk adverse, you're in cash, it may not be enough. You got to be able to be in a diverse portfolio, and we try to help you do that with the target date funds that are available. It's a variable retirement benefit. Not quite sure what it's going to be because of the impact on investments through each year, as there are gains and losses that are weighed upon the account balance as you go through your working career. And it does not have a death or a disability monthly benefit attached to it. Next slide, please. Since the defined benefit plan is the retirement plan that is used by the city for basically the lion's share of the retirement benefits that are going to be held by the other ones, but this is the one that's considered most. The key thing here is it provides a lifetime benefit for your employees. State law does require them to share it with their spouse. They do have the option to share that benefit, although at a reduced benefit to them, to a beneficiary. But it is a lifetime benefit, and it's typically called a pension. Next slide. The defined benefit plan works this way. And I always like to take this calculation a little bit backwards. So you take your multiplier, and I'm going to use 2% because that's easy math for me. Someone works for 30 years. That's easy. That would give them 60% of their final average compensation, which would equal their annual benefit. That it's a simple three-part equation that will equal the employee's benefit. Their multiplier times the years that they work times their final average compensation. Next slide, please. So here, I'm going to use some other numbers than what I made up with, but you have a final average compensation of 3. So they take those 3 years, they divide it by 12, they came up with the final average compensation. It was $50,000. They worked for 30 years. They had a 2% multiplier. 60% of 50,000 is going to equal a $30,000 a year retirement benefit, or based on 12 months, $2,500 a month. That 59% in this example, the benefit would provide. What that's trying to say is that typically you would have to have your final average compensation or your last year. You're probably not going to get quite to 60 because you had 1 year that was a little higher, 1 year that was maybe there, and 1 year a little less. So it usually typically works out to be something just a little bit lower than the straight 60%. Next slide, please. The lifetime benefit stability. The calculated benefit will not change with investment market and fluctuation, and with market fluctuations. So what this really does is this provides to your employees that when they retire, they understand that they are going to have a stable benefit. I'm not saying a better benefit. I'm not saying the best benefit. I'm saying that it's going to be stable. It's going to be the same based on that three-part equation. And that these benefits are protected by our Constitution. I believe it's Article 9, Section 24. Next statement, please, or next slide, please. We talk about unfunded accrued liabilities, and that the city of Mount Pleasant has been in the MERS system since we started. And I'm going to tell you that we pre-fund that benefit. And you're going to say, how's that happen, Tony? Well, the concept is that's what happens. If a group comes to us now and they want to go on a going forward basis with no prior service to be accounted when they're going on this plan, it's just from today going forward, then we would start telling them what their required contributions are. And if all the assumptions are met, meaning the assets would grow, we say we were going to grow, that they're not going to have any market losses, that everyone's going to retire when we say they're going to retire. There's not going to be no FAC padding. There's going to be no early retirements that we weren't aware of, and on with some of these assumptions. In that instance, the benefit is absolutely pre-funded. There have been cases where groups have come into us and they were giving prior service all the way back for every employee's date of hire. And they didn't start at 100% funded. They started in the hole. And so we were funding the benefit. The normal cost is what's pre-funding it. And then we had to have a makeup provision to fund that liability that yet hasn't been pre-funded, which is called a portion to fund the unfunded accrued liability. So we try to pre-fund that by the employer contributions. And then if you have member contributions, they help as well. And then we invest those contributions with a prudent long-term approach, which is downside protection with upside participation. Next slide, please. So I put on this slide that isn't all that fancy and colorful as the previous slides have been, but this are some numbers from your 2022 annual actuarial valuation. The city is 70% funded, meaning that you have a liability that isn't fully funded, but you have assets to pay 70% of the current value of benefits earned. You have 4 divisions, 2 open to new hires and 2 that are closed to new hires, but they are still defined benefit plans, and you're an open defined benefit plan. You also have a defined contribution plan that supplements their retirement plan. 457 plan is in place. And well, like I said, they're available, but we can talk about those later. Your actuarially determined contribution for 2024 over all the divisions, including your unfunded accrued liability, I believe is 1.6 million. And let me make sure I didn't type that incorrectly. I'm looking it up again on your annual valuation. But and that is correct. That is your required contributions for fiscal year beginning January 1 of 2024. And the lion's share of that is to pay down your unfunded accrued liability. It's more like about 2/3 of it is paying your unfunded accrued liability, and 1/3 of that is paying your normal cost of the plan. If all the assumptions are met and your ADC is paid, as it always has been, the city will be 100% funded in 2041. And there's a lot of, ifs in that, but that's how the plan is set up, and that's how we set your required contributions. We set up those assumptions, and if they're met, and you make that annual determined contribution with our amortization policy, you should be 100% funded in 2041. The thing to think about is there's a lot of active employees at the city of Mount Pleasant. We don't think about the former vested employees that have value in the pension system, or those that have retired, or the beneficiaries of those that have retired. There are 233 participants in the plan as of this 12/31/22 annual valuation. And with that, I could go into a little bit more of the defined contribution or anything like that, but I'm available to take any questions that you have on your defined benefit plan at this time.
Commissioner Wingard.
Talked about the 70% funded. Are we in a similar position as other municipalities of our size? Just kind of in your work in our region, what does that look like as far as other institutions?
This 70% funded is one of the most common levels, and it's only one metric in determining the health of a pension plan. But yes, it is the most common, and across all of MERS, actually.
Question.
Commissioner Asman.
The 2 open divisions, I would assume the fire department and the police department, is that?
That's actually a separate pension plan. That's Act 345, and we're actually going to have a presentation on that immediately after this. This is covering PACT employees, so management employees, and our TPOM employees, so streets, water, wastewater, office professionals, code enforcement, et cetera.
Who's it not available to then?
This isn't for police and full-time fire.
Okay, so when I say 4 divisions,
Yeah, we have.
this is just for the office and like you were talking about. Okay.
Yep, correct.
Gotcha. Sorry. I thought that new hires for those 2 closed were no longer.
No, the 2 closed plans were for the same groups, but just with different multipliers.
Yep, makes sense.
Any other questions? Commissioner Wingard.
Yeah, just in your experience, what has been like the biggest changes over time in the industry, I guess, for you? Just as myself trying to get more experience, and this is the first time really interacting with retirements and pension systems. So just curious to just get additional perspective.
I don't want to get into the weeds too deep, knowing that we get actuary coming to discuss your home rule plan. But what have been the biggest changes in this? I would say assumptions used to calculate the value of the pensions, so that we can correctly tell you what the required contributions are to fund those pensions. Life tables had gone up dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years in the calculations of liability. The assumed rate of return has come down dramatically across the nation. in trying to accurately fund these pension plans. I mean, if we put in there that you're going to get a 10% return every year, your minimum required contributions would be much less than what I said they're going to be for 2024. So assumptions are the ones that probably change most often because they have to reflect the experience of the plan. And that means that whatever trend is going on in this industry, those assumptions have to pick up that trend. And if it's, and I say, maybe not just a passing trend, but one that's going to be around for a while. And so that's what I would say would be the biggest change is funding the plans. And because of maybe the time it takes to catch up to these changing trends, maybe changing plans from one type to another type would be what was the result of having to change assumptions.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you for allowing me to be here. It was much more comfortable to stay at home while I'm healing than to have to drive down there. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, so now we have a presentation on Act 345.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Casey Albrandt Rains. I work for a firm called GRS Consulting. And similar to MERS, we only work in the public sector. So can everybody hear me okay if I'm here? I guess we're all in the same room. I don't really need to use the microphone. Yeah. So we actually work with MERS as well to calculate their liabilities. So we're kind of all on the same team here. I've been working at Gabriel Smith, GRS, for the last 7 years and working on Mount Pleasant Act 345 Police Fire Plan that entire time with, as well as my colleague Heidi Berry, who has probably been working on this plan for the last 20 years and several others. So yeah, I guess it was already alluded to that people don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about pensions. It's not really the most exciting topic. And certainly the mechanisms by which we calculate the liabilities, calculate the contributions, it can get quite complicated. And Tony, rightfully so, didn't want to get super deep in the weeds, but I get incredibly excited about these types of things. So any questions that you all might have, I would be probably too enthusiastic to answer them. So fire away at any time during the presentation. I'm certainly all ears. So yeah, let's get started. Like I said, one would certainly be forgiven for not spending a lot of time thinking about these things. So I like to start off just kind of going over the basics because the inherent nature of these calculations is just creates a situation where when I'm giving you the information that you need to make the decisions, which you need to make, obviously the plan needs to get funded and you're responsible for approving those actions and putting the money in the fund. I have to give you the best information that I can. But it's also, in my opinion, perhaps just as important that I educate so that you can make good decisions and have good discussions about these incredibly important topics. So I'm going to start off with those basics, talk a little bit about why we do what we do and why it's so important. And then I'll get into the results because I don't want to throw a table of numbers at you without giving a little bit of context. As much as I love tables of numbers, it's not the case for everyone. And then you're probably wondering, Tony mentioned this idea of actuarial experience. We're all here together. I'm an actuary. You might think, hey, this is an actuarial experience, but it actually means something different. So I'll get into that. And then I'll get into a little bit of the history. We've been working for the Mount Pleasant Act 345 plan for a very long time. So firstly, Act 345 is a Michigan law that is specific to public safety retirement systems. It has all sorts of stipulations about what sort of benefit they're going to have, and specifically they have a fairly a fairly valuable joint and survivor option where the spouse automatically gets 60% of the benefit when the member passes away, which is pretty great. And the idea there being that you want to take care of those who have been, risking their lives to take care of us. Get into some historical information, give you some context, and then give you the things that you really want to remember from what I've said. If one dozes off or glazes over, we can just have that as a takeaway. So I'll jump right into it. Although numbers and words are incredibly important, I'm a picture kind of guy, and I try to keep the numbers and equations to a minimum, but unfortunately we have to do a little bit of algebra here. So as Tony from MERS alluded to, this is a defined benefit. That means that you calculate a benefit when someone retires, and they're going to get that for the rest of their life, and then when they pass, their spouse will go on to receive it. So that is basically what's going to be leaving the fund. And if you kind of zoom out and say, okay, over 100 years, this much in benefits is going to go out. Therefore, I have to put in enough money so that gets funded. And Tony used the term pre-funding, and that's really the most important part of this public sector pension arrangement. So in the private sector, there are very, very strict laws really about how the funds that are that are invested can actually be invested. But when you have a public sector retirement system, you can you have an investment consultant, advisors, and then you have money managers. I'm not sure exactly how it works here, but basically that money gets invested in a diversified portfolio, as our friends at MERS mentioned, and then you try to go out there and really squeeze as much juice as you can. And in my experience and historically, well over half of the actual dollars that go out come from these investment returns that you get over time. And that's why it's incredibly important to put enough money in the fund as early as possible, because then it has time to grow legs. And really, 2/3 of these benefits or more in some cases, if it's truly pre-funded, will actually come from the market. So it saves a lot of taxpayer dollars and is really a wonderful arrangement. So just getting to this equation, contributions that you put in plus the investment income that I mentioned at some point have to equal the benefits that get paid out plus a little bit of expenses. So my picture here, the ratios aren't exactly right, but if the expenses were accurately reflected in my diagram, they might be too small. So I wanted you to be able to see it. What goes out must first come in. But I'm going to focus on the left side of the equation, the contributions and the investment income. So let's zoom back in and let's say, we're at 2022, we have a certain amount of money in the fund, right? Where did that money come from? Well, at some point, someone started contributing. That grew some legs. It grew a little bit of investment income. And so fast forward to today, we have a chunk of money sitting in this trust. Quite a bit of it is investment income, and quite a lot of it is also these contributions. So you can see here, the full amount of those the assets that eventually need to equal those benefits that get paid out, there will be future contributions, but because there is already enough money in there, there will be future investment income, and that's an incredibly important part of this equation. And I just have to keep stressing that is really how this puzzle works. So let's zoom in even further and let's look at how the dollars move in any given year. So obviously the benefits go out during the year to our retirees, and I have the figures in front of me. So we have 53 benefit recipients currently getting about $2.2 million a year. So that's going to leave the fund in any given year, and then based on the assets that you had, you're going to have some annual investment income that hopefully increases the amount of assets that you have in the trust. Doesn't always happen. That's just part of it. We'll get into that a little bit more later. And then you have an annual contribution, which is always an increase. So that's basically the money out, money in. And then you have a little bit of expenses for custodial bank stuff, the actuary, and education expenses, which I would really encourage you all to look into. And then so the idea is that the assets will grow over time such that you are funding. He mentioned the accrued liability. I'm not going to get into that right now unless you really want me to, but you want to have enough assets in there such that you're covering a measure for these benefits that we have calculated, which basically says once you have this, then you're fully funded, and then you just need to make a certain normal cost contribution, which I will also get into later. But yeah, the idea of the funded status is basically saying, based on the assumptions that we use to calculate the liabilities and to project the benefits into the future, we come up with a measure that's basically that target asset value that you want to have in the trust to have, theoretically a funded ratio of 100%. And so we're talking about stuff that happens in the future, right? And there's always uncertainty with respect to, you talked about the life tables, so that means mortality rates. We have to, assume how long people are going to live and continue to receive the benefits. And that has certainly changed in recent years. People are living longer, and we're catching up with that. We update them, as they come out. There's Society of Actuaries that does the statistics to get all the rates, and we update those, and then they get approved. But really, the most important assumption, and the assumption to which the results are the most sensitive, is this assumed rate of investment return, as Tony mentioned. And currently, the assumed rate of investment return for the Mount Pleasant Police Fire Plan is 6.75, and that's a reduction from 7.25% a couple years ago. And basically, that's another thing that we're just responsible for is, as it was mentioned, what are the current trends in the industry? Over the last 20 years, there's been an incredible migration away from these high rates of return. In the 90s, you had incredibly high rates of assumed return, 9%. It's been coming down gradually over the next couple decades, or the subsequent decades. Now, so I work on the smallest police fire plans in the UP with like 10 people, and I also work on statewide plans, and everyone's pretty much in the same ballpark in terms of this assumption. You have a diversified portfolio. You can't have everything, in stocks. You certainly can't have it in Bitcoin or any of this crazy stuff. You have to have a responsible portfolio that generally is along the lines of 60% equities, 40% fixed income, and then diversified among those asset classes. But in my experience, certainly with the plans that I work on, 6.75 is right there in the sweet spot, certainly given the asset allocation that we're looking at here. Okay, so that's the background. And if there's any questions already on what I've said, it's a lot. I get excited, so feel free to stop me. But with that, I'm just going to jump into, as I said, what I'm here for and what we do. So perhaps the most important thing on everyone's mind is how much money we have to put in the piggy bank every year, right? It's certainly, depending on the tax base and financial circumstances, budgets can be strained, and it can be quite stressful to say, oh man, these pensions, they have to get paid, we have to make the contribution, and obviously auditors aren't very happy when you don't make the actuarially recommended determined contribution. So, and Mount Pleasant, I will add, historically has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of getting the money in the fund, and that's our job, is to calculate that rate. You all put it in there, and then it grows with assets investment into the future. We also, so we calculate the liabilities, which is a part of that contribution rate calculation, and then that you take your liabilities, so that's the target that we have for how much money we need to be fully funded, and then we compare that to the assets, and then that is your funded ratio. I'll add to that briefly that, especially in recent time, there's quite a bit of market volatility. So you put money in the market, it bounces around, it does what it needs to do, and that's okay. That's really where a lot of these gains come from. But if we just use the market value of assets, and then we say, okay, we're going to take a snapshot, valuation date of December 31st. Well, some years December 31st is a really great day in the market, and some days it's not. And so what we do is we smooth out the returns that we observe in any given year, and calculate something that very closely resembles a 5-year moving average. And the reason we do that is to achieve some sort of contribution rate stability, because you all need to be able to plan things, and it gets quite awkward when the contribution rate is doubling or getting cut into a third every year. So again, then we analyze the experience to kind of look at our assumptions, because our assumptions need to constantly be changing. It's inherently a scientific process. And with the world of science, our understanding of the world changes and the world itself also changes, and so we need to adapt. So then, a discussion of risks, there's a whole lot to get into. I don't want to belabor it too much, but that's also our job, is to kind of, it's a slow game, but it is incredibly important that we are adapting to changing circumstances. So the beloved table of numbers, and I am so sorry that we all have to look at this together. But so the actuarial liability, that's where we do all the calculations, multiply the probabilities, sum it up, da-da-da-da. Last year, we had an actuarial accrued liability of 36.5 million. This year, 38.3 million. So in terms of the liability, that's sensitive to what happens in terms of retirements, mortality. You could have more or less folks passing away in any given year, and to the extent that less folks pass away than we would have predicted based on our models, that would be then more expensive because they're living longer. But that's not bad, because we want these folks to have long, wonderful lives with the pension that they've earned from all their years of service. I can say that in this last year, I believe there were 6 retirements for police, fire, which we would have expected 3 given the demographic makeup of the group. But that's just kind of how it goes when you have a smaller population. So I'd like to zoom out a bit. Over the last 10 years, there have been 15 retirements. That's versus what was the 7 retirements we would have expected. So one could look at maybe changing the retirement rates, but that's also simply a matter of demographics. So I don't know that I would say, because these folks retired in that manner over the last 15 years, that we should then say, because it's a much younger population. We have an average age of 44, average service of 13, and you're retiring at 55 or 50, age 50 with 25 years of service. So we could look at that, but like I said, the most important assumption is this assumed rate of return. So I wouldn't recommend changing anything about the demographic assumptions. We have updated the mortality tables a couple of years ago, so the assumptions are in good shape, and it's just going to be experience, and it bounces around a bit. So the liabilities increased a little bit, as one would expect them to do. You have people, coming to retirement, starting to collect the benefits, and then I compare them to that actuarial value of assets. So that's not the market value, and I really want to stress that. This is a more stabilized value of assets, where we basically take whatever happened with the market in any given year, and we slice it up into chunks. So I think we had about a $7.6 million loss approximately for the year ended December 31st, 2022. So we chop that up and then blend that in with gains and losses from prior years. So that's why, even though we had a really bad market loss, which is consistent with everything I've observed as of December 31st for 2022, the assets still actually went up a little bit. They just didn't go up as much as we would have liked them to. So that yields a funded ratio of 83% for 2022, which is actually pretty good. I mean, like I said, I work on all sorts of plans. I can say that I'm very happy, and I think we should all be proud of the fact that we're in such good shape with this Act 345 plan. And just to give it a little bit of context, in the early 2000s, the plan was actually funded more than 100% because of the contributions that were there. But such is the nature of the world, 2008 hits, you lose a bunch of assets, the phased-in consequences come in over the next 5 years, we're down to 90%. And then with the changing climate with fixed income and equities, we had to change the assumptions, I think around about 2012, to reflect the fact that people aren't earning the same amount of investment returns that they were back in the 90s. And if you use a lower discount rate, the result on the liabilities is that we calculate them to be higher, because you're just not getting as much money out of the market, so you need more today. So to the extent that you can really be comparing the funded ratio, between decades like that, one just has to be, careful about the nuances. But I guess what I'm trying to say is even though the funded ratio decreased a little bit this year, we're still on track to get where we need to go. So I'm just, to give that was just a little bit of context about the results themselves in terms of the liabilities. We use those liabilities to then calculate a contribution rate. And as our friend from MERS mentioned, a contribution rate is made up of 2 components. One is what I mentioned before, it's called the normal cost. And that's basically the cost of one more year of accruals of a benefit. So, one more year of service just increases that calculated benefit. He showed us the the formula to calculate the benefits. We tell you how much you're going to have to put in to basically account for the fact that everyone has just got one more year of service. So now the projected benefit is that much bigger. And then the other piece of it, which Tony also mentioned, is a piece to pay off the unfunded liabilities. And so the unfunded liabilities are basically when we take those assets that we are the liability that we have calculated, and then we compare that to the assets that we have on hand, and then that difference, that's the unfunded liability. Basically what you do is you take that amount, you say, okay, at some point we need to have that in the fund, you amortize it, you pay it off like a mortgage. So currently, basically whatever's left from that difference between the 38.3 and the 31.8, you take that difference and then we amortize it like a mortgage over 22 years, and then we come up with an amortization payment, and that's basically the contribution rate that we're looking at. So we do it on a percent of payroll basis, and the reason we do that is these active populations aren't going anywhere in terms of the stability of the population itself. You need to have police and fire, especially. This isn't one of those things where we close and then, our assumption is based on the fact that we have a stable active population, and you need to be able to budget. So what we do is we calculate it as a level percent of payroll, similar to how you contribute taxes on your pay statements to any given thing. It's just an easier way to budget. So as a percent of payroll, you have 30.79. 17% of which is the normal cost that I was talking about. And that, as you can see there, that remains fairly stable from year to year. So the increase that we're seeing from last year, roughly $100 million difference in the contribution, that's a result of that increase in the payment to amortize the unfunded liabilities. And that's almost entirely a product of the fact that market returns as of December 31st, 2022 for the year were just not favorable. So the contribution rate went up for this year. And that's, the explanation for that. I would kind of ask if there's any questions about that at this particular juncture, because that's kind of the proof is in the pudding for that one. Having none, I'll move on. So that's the most, oh, yes, please.
Okay, so that's the reason why I really didn't want to do math. Okay, so this is a lot of
I get it.
Yeah, I'm an English professor and I love that. But this is a lot of information for me to unpack.
Absolutely.
So I'm seeking clarity here where you say, you talked about the contributions. Am I to understand that this contribution from the employer or from the employee? I'm not so sure, who is, whose contribution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is already net. We've already accounted for the fact that employees contribute a certain amount. So this is for the employer. This is the employer.
So what's going up is so what's going up is the employer's contribution to this.
The employer.
Yeah, I saw that, but I wasn't very clear about that.
That's also a valid criticism because, the actuarially determined contribution should really say actuarially determined employer contribution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's right. I also have another one. I do know that, you said you don't want to talk about the risks or, and I'm thinking here, so apart from the the long tenure of people or people not retiring, what else is, posing a threat to, to what you're talking to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so I said I didn't want to talk about it only because, as you said, there is a lot of information, and I want this to be something that people don't roll their eyes at because it can be incredibly boring. But I would love to talk about the risks.
But but for me, that's important because then if we don't know what
Yeah.
the threats might be or the risks are, then how do we,
Totally agree.
begin to prepare, at
Yeah.
least, I think we do need to anticipate whatever that risk is. And
Yeah.
right now, I'm not so sure, besides retirement, I don't know what else is.
Sure. Yeah, so I can say the biggest risk, as I was trying to stress before, is investment returns being less than what we assume that they will be going into the future. So, and that really, in terms of, if you kind of fiddle with the assumptions or play out scenarios, that is the one assumption that, so we're assuming going into the future that assets that are in the trust will earn, almost 7% each year. And to the extent that they don't earn that much, or to the extent that money is actually lost, that on a short-term basis and certainly on a long-term basis is going to be the greatest sensitivity. And that is certainly, like, market risk, without a doubt, is absolutely the most vital component to account for. But like I said, so I mean, we monitor all of that, and we're very tuned in to the extent to which you're exposed to those risks, not necessarily given the specific assets, but I assume that with your investment advisors, if we have a 6.75 assumed rate of return, then they're doing what they need to do to make sure that you have a diversified portfolio so that you're not unnecessarily exposed to market risk. But you're absolutely right. And I applaud the initiative to be as aware as possible of any risks that are posed here. And so what I can say is I like to use the analogy of a boat. So assumptions regarding retirement and mortality, rates of disability, rates of withdrawal, they are incredibly important, but it's kind of a long game. I like to think of those as if they're not tweaked perfectly, it's kind of a leak in the boat. Right, but in terms of this investment return assumption, that can be waves kind of crashing over into the hull of the boat. So that's kind of my analogy there to give you an idea of the extent to which the results and the funded status of the plan are really sensitive to investment performance. I hope that answers your question. I could talk about it as much as you want. Yeah.
So does that investment return, does that make the percentage that we're fully funded volatile? Does it continually change that?
Yes. And
so
yeah.
how does the rate of return then change where we were 5 years ago? I mean, if we could have been fully funded, 5 years ago, and then the rate of return was at 4%, and so that changes the amount that we're funded because of that liability.
It does, and I like to think of it as a moving target. It's just
I don't.
Yeah, no, I got you. But so that's the inherent trade-off here. So
sure,
and that's why I like to start with the fact that so much of these benefits come from the market.
Yeah.
And so you really need to have that. And so we can't get away from that circumstance, because if we said, we're going to just pay it as we go, we're not going to pre-fund, we're not going to invest, then we're talking about a financial strain that is just really unnecessary, frankly. But you're exactly right. And that is one of the most frustrating parts, when people realize, like, we're trying to get to 100% funded, but then when we get there, you're going to say we need to change the asset allocation. And that's true. And that's why I don't like to use air quotes a lot, but this whole 100% funded thing, it's a theoretical principle, that we strive to achieve. And that's why I'm standing here giving you kudos for being 83% funded. As our friends at MERS mentioned, you're 70% funded on the general employee side. So I mean, I'm looking at this and grateful to be able to give you good news that even though you had a rocky year, lost $7+ million on a market value in 2022, still 83% funded. That's stellar. So you're absolutely right. It is frustrating, but I think if you kind of look at it as more of a target, a moving target, albeit, and a theoretical principle, and it's really a budgeting model. I guess it's inherently a model. It's good, sure. But no, it's not lost on me. It seems unnecessarily complicated, doesn't it? and it might be, but it's just the way it works. Yeah. Good question. That's excellent.
We have a question.
Please.
Well, mine is a little bit along the line of Commissioner Chapman's, kind of a historical look back of, say, if things were great in the 90s, was there no such part of the equation about making up the unfunded portion of it?
There, actually, in the early 2000s, there were no unfunded liabilities. It was 112% funded.
Wow.
Yeah, but with an assumed rate of return, I think I didn't have the information because we're talking about decades ago. I've only been doing this for 7 years with this. So it was probably an assumed rate of return in the 8, 9, I would think. And the issue there is that in the 90s, you could have money in a money market account, basically a checking account, a savings account, and you'd be getting 6%. And so then you have a little bit in there, and then you have some equities. I mean, we're in a similar kind of fixed income rate environment right now, but the extent to which that will persist, I think, is certainly in question. And so we keep track of these capital market expectations, and they've been consistently declining over the last 15 years, I would say. And this year they actually ticked back up. But we don't change the assumption that quickly because this really is a long game. We want to have these assumptions based on long-term persisting trends, because otherwise, like you say, you wouldn't be able to compare anything to anything if you're switching these assumptions every year. Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question so much. Trying to contain my excitement. Is it yeah, so the rest of the slides are, like I said, I try to keep the tables and of numbers to a minimum. Because the rest of the presentation is pretty much just pictures, because I'm a picture guy. So I'll just go through it, and then as any questions pop, but is there anything else that we want to talk about on this? It's the most painful part of the presentation, so.
Oh dear, I think we're good.
Good, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so back to this actuarial experience, as fun as that sounds. So the way we calculate that is, as I said, we have assumptions, and that allows us to make a prediction about the future. And basically what we say is, okay, we had our results from last year, and then we had our model to, have a very good guess about what was going to happen in the next year. And then we come up with, so the UAAL, that's your unfunded actuarial accrued liability, unfunded liability, whatever you want to call it. Last year it was 5.1 million. We expected it to be 5.2 million by kind of doing a simple calculation of contributions and benefits. And then the extent to which the actual unfunded liability differs from that, you either have an actuarial gain or an actuarial loss, and that's what you call the experience. So the actual unfunded liability was $1.3 million more than what we would have guessed. And that's, I would say, 90%, 95% a product of that investment experience that we were talking about. So that's basically how we calculate it, kind of a simplified picture of how that gets calculated. And then to just look historically, it was quite a market loss, but as I said, not inconsistent with anything that I've seen for that calendar year. It's just the luck of the draw sometimes, and that's just the inherent nature of taking a snapshot at a given day in a given year. Sometimes it's really bad. That's why we smooth it out. But this gives you kind of an idea of the magnitude relative to previous years. It was quite a loss. I'd be very surprised if that happened again this year, but I don't know.
Yeah, so just to clarify real quick, the actuarial experience is the amount above or below projections, like the difference between the projection and what actually occurred?
So actuarial experience is kind of an umbrella term for us comparing what we expected with what actually happened. Yeah, and the amount itself is going to be an actuarial gain if it was good, and a loss if it was bad.
Okay,
yeah, good question. Yeah, so it was quite a big loss, but you can see last year we had not quite as big of a gain, but that was the result of the market. So it goes up and it goes down. Last year was pretty good. We're phasing in those gains. This year was, choppy waters, as I like to say, and we'll be phasing in those losses. Hopefully it just fizzles out over time with future gains, and then, it will be, back on track. So this is a illustration of what I'm talking about. So you can see over the past decade, it's been since the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, like returns in the market have been quite good, and they've been more or less in line with what we were expecting. As you can see, that number is going up each year, which is what you want. And then what we do to keep things stable is we have the actuarial value of assets, and you can see that that dark line is more or less a trailing moving average of the dotted line, and that's really just an illustration of, you know, the mechanism by which we achieve stability in the results through that smoothing method. So that's just an illustration of that. Here, so getting into a little bit of the recent funding progress. As we alluded to earlier, you know, changing the assumptions changes the funded ratio, and I think over this last decade, we've, you know, made certainly a number of, I think, a minor change at the beginning of this period to the assumed rate of return. 2 years ago, we changed it from 7.25 to 6.75, so that's that small decrease in the funded ratio that you saw from 2020 to 2021, where it went from 87 to 86. So that was a product of that. Even though we had market returns that were favorable, we changed the assumption, so it went down. And then this year, the decrease in the funded ratio is a product of the actual returns. There were no changes in assumptions this year, so that's purely actuarial experience. Then to just kind of, and this is another part where I like to talk about the risks. You kind of zoom out and you look at what's happened in the past, and then, you know, inherently what we're assuming is what's going to happen in the future. But to assess where we're at, I like to just take, you know, zoom out and look at what's been happening. So as we heard in the last presentation, the contributions that go in are calculated as a % of the active member payroll. So thankfully we have an open plan, so you have this payroll that you can use as the basis to make these contributions. And so you want to have a balance kind of between the amount of benefits that are getting paid and the amount of payroll that you're, you know, upon which you're calculating this contribution. So right now we have a contribution for the employer, their rate is about 30%. Because we have, so 53 benefit recipients and 38 actives. So payroll is about 3.2 million. And that's the basis upon which, you know, we're calculating these contributions. If we just were to pretend that we had a much smaller active population, let's say 10 people, and, you know, the payroll were maybe a third of what it was, then we'd be looking at a contribution rate that's 100%, close to 100% of payroll, and that would be a bit startling. So to your point, that would kind of be a risk. But that's kind of a long game risk, but that is certainly something you want to think about. Again, with public safety plans, generally cities do a pretty good job of making sure that you have a stable active population. I don't know if we have any public safety staff in here at all. Is there a firefighter or police officer around?
No, we have.
Oh, okay, well, hello. But so I know recently, certainly for police, there's been issues with recruiting. So that can certainly pose a challenge in terms of keeping those younger folks around. And then to the extent that then you have enough payroll to not have these awkwardly large contribution rates. So that's one thing to monitor, but again, that's a long game. The real big in-your-face risk is the market returns, you know, not being what we assumed. Okay, so these are the important things. The employer contribution rate went up, as I said. It's a product of market experience. The losses and gains over the last 5 years kind of all add up to about $2.8 million in losses that we'll be recognizing. So basically, if we don't have future market gains to offset, you know, the aggregate losses we've seen over the last 5 years, then the contribution rate will creep up a little bit every year. Funded ratio will creep down a little bit every year. But we'll just, you know, remains to be seen the extent to which that will come to fruition. And as I said, there were no changes in actuarial assumptions or benefit plan provisions for the year. So there's some other, you know, fun information in here. If you all would like to go with that, I have to have these disclosures so I don't get in trouble with my boss. But other than that, that'll do it. If there's any other questions, be happy to answer those. If not, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
All right, we're going to move on to are there any additions or deletions to the agenda at this time? I'll accept a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
All those opposed, no. At this time, we have public input on agenda items. If you wish to speak on an agenda item, you may step to the podium. You will be asked to state your name and address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. If you're joining us by Zoom, you will be able to use the raised hand feature or *9 if you're joining Zoom by phone. Once you are let into the meeting, you'll be asked to state your name and address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on agenda items at this time? Is there anyone in Zoom?
No, be on Zoom.
Okay, are there any emails?
They're not.
Okay. Nobody is coming up to speak at this time, so we are going to move on to the receipt of petitions and communications. Manager DeSenza.
Receipt of petitions and communications includes the monthly report on police-related citizen complaints received, minutes of the Zoning Board of Appeals from November, and notice of temporary traffic control order number 6-2023 and 7-2023.
All right, are there any items on the consent calendar that need to be moved into the regular agenda? Seeing none, Manager DeSenza.
Consent items includes the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting held August 28, 2023. Consider resolution in support of final approval of temporary traffic control order number 5/2023, which removes a no parking sign on South Kinney. Consider approval of an amendment to the bond counsel contract with Dickinson Wright for $10,500. Consider approval of a contract with R&T Murphy Trucking for 2023 through 2024 leaf hauling. Consider approval of a contract with R&T Murphy Trucking for 2023 through 2025 snow hauling. Consider approval of a contract with Fleece and Vanderbrink for professional engineering services for Mill Pond Park Weir and pedestrian bridge repairs and Chippewa Park Riverbank restoration for $77,500. Receive fall 2023 Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe 2% funding requests from city departments. Receive proposed 2024 annual operating budget and set a public hearing for November 13, 2023 on the same. Consider resolution to amend 2023 operating budget and consider approval of payrolls and warrants.
Do I have a motion to accept the consents?
Second.
All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
All those opposed, no. Moving on, we do not have any public hearings today, but we do have some new business. Manager DeSenza.
For new business, we do have the consider appointments to the Local Officers Compensation Commission as recommended by the Appointments Committee. So the city charter requires that the Local Officers Compensation Commission be formed to determine the salary of each elected city official. The commission must meet this year, which is once every 5 years. The Appointments Committee has provided a list of individuals that it recommends for service to this commission. City Commission is asked to consider these for appointment.
Okay. Vice Mayor Alsager is the chair of the Appointments Committee, and I'll hand the mic to you.
Okay, very good. Well, the committee includes Commissioners Eke and Commissioner Asman, and we took this charge very seriously to come up with some names, and we were asked to fill 3 spots of the 7-person board, mostly because people from the 4 years ago maybe weren't here or interested any longer. So anyhow, we're going to be able to have at least 4 people meet. So that'll be an effective meeting. So the 3 that we are recommending are Gary Mark and Jim Cridler and Brian Hansen. Those 3.
I will ask for any discussion at this time on these names.
How'd they come before you?
I'm sorry.
Just curious how these 3 individuals came up as part for the commission, for this commission.
Well, 2 of them are already on other commissions, so that was an easy look right there.
Gotcha.
All right, is there a motion?
I'll move that we accept the 3 members of the community appointed to the commission.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
All those opposed, no. All right, so now we have 4 on this board
Yeah.
that we need 7 on?
They
we
might
could
be,
meet.
they might be able to reach the other 3, but at first they weren't having any luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, now we will move on to consider the sole source purchase for the lime pumps.
The city peristaltic lime pumps at the water treatment plant need replacement. Staff is recommending a sole source purchase from Kerr Pump and Supply based on staff experience with the pumps. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Director of Public Works, Tim Middleton, to discuss the selection process that led us to the Kerr pumps. Afterwards, City Commission is asked to approve the purchase of those pumps.
Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, so.
Can you step up to them?
I'm sorry. So the existing lime pumps that we have are approximately 28 years old. They run daily. They've been a very good pump design for us. And so we looked at a variety of pumps. Actually, staff looked at a variety of pumps and eliminated those ones that they didn't think really fit the picture or the design that they wanted to go with. And so we went back to that same similar design of peristaltic pumps, and we looked at 6 or 7 pumps out of the remainder of the pumps that were there. And so we looked at different things to come to that decision. We looked at warranty, we looked at design. One of the big factors was that they wanted a pump that had a gearbox and a motor that were separated from each other and were each individually supported by their own bearings. So they've seen from other municipalities in their own experience that gives a very robust design and a lot of support to the system. And so we narrowed that down to just a couple pumps from there. One of those was a pump that is it's not manufactured, is supplied out of South Carolina. And that pump is essentially the same pump that we chose, but that company sold that pump to another company. And so the representative for that is here in Michigan, and that's Kerr Pump, and it's a Netsch pump. We feel that the Netsch pump has a better box on it and a better motor both. So just in terms of overall system design, we think that that would be a longer lasting pump. It has rollers instead of shoes, which is kind of an upgrade from older models of pumps. So we think that'll give us a little more extended hose life and stuff. So the lime pumps pump hydrated lime or calcined lime that's been slaked. That hits the water, goes to about 160, 170 degrees and is given a chance to cool, and that's pumped into the clarifiers to provide the softening for the soft water in the city. So based on those things, this pump is far from the most expensive pump. There was one other design that could have been cheaper, but would have meant that we had selected our own gearboxes, our own motors, built an accompanying base for it, and put just simply a lot of staff time putting that together. And there's no warranty for that total system when we build it in-house. Not that we're afraid to do that, we just don't think that makes the most sense in this application. So based on that, we're recommending this Netsch pump from Kerr. And like many municipal products, there's often only one provider of it in the state, and in this case, it's Kerr Pump. We have a lot of experience with Kerr Pump. They've been responsive. They've been good to us in the past, so we think that's just a good recommendation.
Are there any questions?
I just have a quick question, Tim. Do you anticipate the life cycle of a new pump would be about 20? I mean, I know we don't have a crystal ball, but is that like average life cycle for that product?
Yep, typically, most equipment we deal with runs from 20 to 30-year life cycles. And we think this is actually even maybe a little bit of an upgrade compared to our other ones. So we're pretty confident that it'll get good life out of it.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, no discussion, I will ask for a motion.
I'll move that we accept the recommendation to purchase the 3-niche Peripro peristaltic pumps. Do you want me to read all of this?
No.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Asman, was that a second?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
Yes.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. At this time, we have announcements on city-related businesses and new issues and new business. Does anybody have anything to bring forward? Commissioner Bush.
After our discussion at the last meeting about feral cats with Chief Lobsinger, I was doing a little research and I spoke with some community members and I also spoke with a representative for Community Cat Coalition. And I mentioned the notion that we had discussed a possible contract opportunity with Community Cat Coalition, and they said they would be receptive to that discussion. They also added that because volunteer recruitment has been so meager for them, there's basically been 2 individuals working for a lot of the summer, and they've canceled the rest of their summer and fall plans because they simply just do not have the people power. So I do think that we can't have the fire department doing this all by ourselves, and I was wondering if there would be any interest in having a work session and maybe kind of exploring some options, seeing if a contract would make sense, and if so, what that would look like.
Okay. Commissioner Eke.
We've had a number of complaints from residents regarding speeding on city streets. And so I'm bringing this up. In fact, a few days ago, I was walking back from campus and, one of my neighbors stopped me to say, we've got problems. Speeding on Preston, and then 3 other people joined him and they were all talking about the same thing, concerned that, especially the intersection of Watson and Preston, people might be killed there. They have watched near accidents or near misses. And so one of them asked what it would take to have the speed monitoring device that we have on Watson Watson also on Preston. I said I would bring this up. There have been complaints about Watson also. Then there are complaints about, I think it's Washington. So there are, I know that we can't stand there and monitor the speed, but what, Director Laureate, this is your domain. I do think that if our residents are noticing problems with speeding in the city, we need to at least investigate what to do. I worry about people getting knocked down. There are children on those streets, actually. So I'm bringing this up. Perhaps we could do some research or do some investigation to find out what we could do to remedy, potential problems on our city.
Okay. Commissioner Wingard.
Yep, I just wanted to comment. We had a number of residents reach out to us concerning options for natural landscaping and updating the city code to allow for it would be non-traditional ideas of what a lawn would look like. So something beyond just cut grass, of something, again, more natural in the description. Been a lot of opportunities for education for me on that topic, and I'm excited to share some of those with my fellow commissioners. I believe, talking with City Manager DeSense, that we're going to have a work session that is going to cover some of these topics for further opportunities. I know there's at least one resident out in the audience who wanted to speak on that during public comments. So I just wanted to say thank them and anyone else for hanging around through a very lengthy meeting to be able to offer comment on that. And then I also wanted to say COVID boosters, updated boosters should be coming out probably towards the end of the month. So just look to get your shot, stay healthy, and keep your community healthy. Thank you.
Commissioner Bush.
I would like to reiterate Commissioner Wingard's support of I'm looking for maybe some discussions that involve consistency, because we do have a code that is fairly strict, but I know that there are times and places where exceptions have been made under certain circumstances, and I think that needs to be represented across the board so that residents do understand they have different options for lawn care and property maintenance.
Vice Mayor?
I've been approached about getting some recognition for someone on the historic bridge that connects our City Hall parking lot to Island Park. And the city resident that first brought it up to me said, well, you have to get Kathy Ling's name on it because she was on the commission, when the decision was made to not replace it, but to kind of rehab it, that it is a good sturdy bridge and, has the longevity that we look for in things. So when I talked to Kathy about it, she recommended someone else who actually had provided all of the research and really promoted it. And the gentleman's name is Hudson Keenan. And so I don't know if this needs to happen at a work session, but maybe there could be a plaque or something, thanking him for his efforts to save that bridge.
Commissioner Eke?
I just wanted to add my voice to what my colleagues have said, Commissioner Weingart and Commissioner Bush, regarding natural landscape. This also happens in other cities. Perhaps what we need to do, rather than unilaterally just, sort of say, we're going to do something, but maybe do some research to see what obtains in other areas and then what we can come up with so that, we have some kind of coherence or uniformity and clarity for people. That way we don't have, 10 feet tall grass somewhere and 3 feet tall, brush somewhere, and then people are screaming about the inconsistencies, right? My inclination is to do some research and find out what is happening in other areas, what we can do in our own small community. I'm not assuming that what is possible in other areas may be applicable here, but what can we do in our own community?
Compromise, right?
Yeah, let's find out what would work for us and make sure that, we do a good investigation, research to see this is what is going to work for. But I am supportive of, I am an environmentalist. Anybody who knows me knows, I'll say yes. So.
All right. Are there any other issues or new business? Manager.
Just want to say thank you to the City Commission tonight for your time and attentiveness to the two presentations this evening. I know there's a lot of interesting concepts that were thrown folks' way, especially if you're new to the understanding the concepts of the defined benefits that we have here within the city. But I know one of the representatives had talked about it as sort of a moving target. However, one thing I do want to underline to the City Commission is that these have real impacts and challenges within the budget. And I know I talk about that in the 2024 proposed operating budget. Right at the front is my transmittal letter, and I do give some discussion on the impact of those numbers to the city's budget. So just want to draw your attention to that. And again, thank you for your patience through those presentations.
Any other? Yes, the presentations were very informative, and I do appreciate the questions that were asked and the thoughtfulness of the commission. Does the manager have any other discussion of any of the issues that the commission has brought forward, or do we know where we're going?
As was noted, it was discussed at our agenda meeting this past week that we will be working on a work session discussing natural landscaping or some of those kind of ordinance provisions. So I'll be meeting with the team tomorrow morning to discuss a timeline for that. I think it's very likely either at our next meeting or at the meeting after that, we'll be able to talk about that one. Two other discussions that were brought up. One was the TNR program and the potential contracting with another organization. I think the question back to the commission is there enough interest here in having a work session at a future meeting to discuss that?
Yes,
Yes, I have interest in that.
yes.
So with a majority of city commissioners, we can go ahead and we can work, and put that into the agenda as well. And then the note about speeding on city streets, I will meet with Director Loria and we'll talk about what we can do to remedy that, whether that's putting the speed radar sign out there or whatever we need to do.
Or speed bumps, something. Thank you.
And then, lastly, the naming of the bridge. Maybe a question for the city commission, if there's enough interest in moving that forward in some meaningful way, or do we want to have a work session on that first to talk about, I don't know if the city commission wanted to talk about, the necessity of it, or I don't know if other names need to come forward or anything like that. I would leave that to the city commission as to where you're at in the decision-making process. But if you let me know that you're interested in it, we can start moving forward with the process for that.
Commissioner Ake.
I think it's important to recognize people who have contributed to, the city in significant ways, So I'm not sure that, I suppose the only thing that I would like to know is a little bit of history. If we can be provided with some history, some background, about this, Mr. Keenan, you said?
Keenan.
Keenan, yes. So, I think that would be important. And maybe interview people who know this, Mr. Keenan. I'm not so sure about a work session, but providing that information would be helpful. And if it is necessary to have a work session, then we can go forward, but that's my inclination.
Commissioner Bush.
Does the city itself not have like a system in place to establish something like this, or does it fall? Well, I know there's something that falls under Parks and Recreation, and so can we just adopt like the Parks and Recreation process for this bridge? I mean, it's parks adjacent especially. And then, I mean, if we don't have a system in place that's related to city infrastructure, yes, then perhaps that's something that needs to be addressed too.
Okay. Yeah, to answer that question, I don't have an answer to that question. It'd be something I'd have to take a look at. I've not been through such a process with the city at this point. So I think I would take your note then, if there is a process, seems like there's interest in working our way through it. If not, we should discuss a process, work our way through it, and come to the same conclusion.
I agree with that. Commissioner Ake.
Just out of curiosity, under whose responsibility does that fall? Is it Park and Recreation, or it's just simply the cities? Because if it is Park and Recreation's responsibility, why not have them do what they usually do and look at that? But if it's not, then, it's your responsibility.
I'll work with the staff and I will find out what the process is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions? All right, at this time, we're going to open up the floor for public comment on agenda and non-agenda items. If you are in the public and you would like to come forward, you may step up to the podium. You'll be asked your name and your address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. If there's anybody on Zoom, you may use the raised hand feature or *9 if you're joining Zoom by phone. You'll be let into the meeting and then be asked your name and address and been given 5 minutes. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to step forward at this time? Okay.
Hi, my name's Joellen DeLucia, and I live at 634 South University Avenue. I don't think I have much to say. I'm the person who wrote many of you about the noxious weed ordinance. I received a couple of warnings for a portion of my property where I had been trying to kind of institute some kind of naturalized landscaping. So I just really wanted to come up and thank you all and the city for establishing a working group and thinking about revising the code.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward? Is there anyone on Zoom?
There is not.
No? Are there any emails?
There are not.
All right. This time I will close the public input. Is there anyone that wishes to remain and do any other extra work at this time?
I'm teaching tomorrow.
I will entertain
I teach,
a
but I
motion.
move, I move.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
All those opposed, no. We are adjourned at 8:54.
Thank